I'm Abby Meller, Managing Director of Moreover. I'm the host of Leading Lights, the podcast for women in the charity sector.
Hi Angela, thank you for joining me today. Would you like to tell me a little bit about who you are, your role and the organisation that you work for?
Yes, of course. Thank you so much for having me. I'm Angela McConville. I'm the Chief Executive of NCT, which is the National Childbirth Trust. We're the nation's charity for pregnancy, birth and early life with the baby. I've been there since January 2020, so I've just celebrated my 5th birthday with NCT.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
And am I right in saying the mission of the NCT is to support parents through the first 1,000 days from pregnancy to the age of 2? Is that right?
Yes, that's right. I think in a previous strategic chapter, we would have described ourselves as like the charity for the first 1,001 days.
Okay.
I think we discovered that what 1,001 days meant for the public was a little confusing. People didn't quite know when did that begin and end. And so we're trying to simplify that now. So we say, for pregnancy and early life with the baby, but we're really talking about from pregnancy through to like a baby being 2 years of age. So yes, that would be broadly 1,000 days.
Brilliant. Thank you. And what I always say to our guests is, can we take a massive step back just so we can understand you a little bit better before we talk about your role in more detail? So take me to one of your earliest memories.
Yes, I listened to some of your previous episodes, and that I find this a really interesting and quite challenging thing to think about, because I'm not sure that I can locate it in one single memory. But what definitely came up for me was like this sort of kaleidoscope of early memories. So I was born and grew up in Northern Ireland, in North Antrim, which is quite a rural and in our community, like Catholic nationalist community. And so I had a whole explosion of memories, which were really located in family life and community life. And that might be partly the church. It might be, there was a very strong, like my life was hyper local when I was a child. We lived, we didn't venture far, we didn't travel. We were so rooted in our community. Like I was in the Irish dancing school. My brothers were in the GAA. And so life really revolved around like family life, community, sport, and sort of like local interests. And I had a whole, as I say, kaleidoscope of memories, which are very much located in that point in time.
Was it a happy time?
Yes, I think it was a happy time largely in terms of my family life, but it was, I think as I've matured, I've come to understand that to grow up and be a young person in a environment which is characterised by violence and sectarianism is something which, whilst we normalise that as children and young people, I have come to realise later that had quite a material impact on me. And I don't think it's a happy accident that I've ended up giving my life to work in areas that are about social justice and community building and building capacity in communities for change. So yes, it was a happy time, but it also was perhaps a time where I think now I would characterise some of my childhood as being hyper-vigilant, and that was really about just the febrile nature of growing up in a quite polarised community.
And you're a mum today.
I am.
And how does that impact? You've talked about the impact it might have had on your career. How does your childhood impact the kind of parent you want to be and the kind of life you're trying to build for your children?
I think my life today is really quite different to the childhood that I had. So I was one of the first people in my family to go to university. I was thinking on my way here that one of the skills that I had to develop as a young adult was just learning how to navigate the world outside like my local community. So like, and if I juxtapose that to my children's life where traveling and, sort of cultural diversity and like these are very lived, real normalized experiences, whereas that wasn't the case for me. And I think that just in terms of parenting, like I just really celebrate that my children have that, have that opportunity to live in such a diverse, creative, way, from the conversations that we would have at our dinner table. Like, it's just such a contrast in content and form to perhaps what I would have experienced as a child.
So perhaps a broader outlook?
A much broader outlook. I don't want to suggest that it's any less wholesome. Like, I had a good family life and my family worked really hard. My father was really hardworking. I think that instilled a great sense of like, the ethics of hard work in me. My mother was, I think we would now say, like a community organizer and a community activist. And I can tell you a bit more about that perhaps and the influence that had on me. So yeah, I don't want to suggest that it was less wholesome. But yes, I certainly think that my children have a lot of privilege of, the types of conversation, the types of experiences, and also just, and of course this played out particularly in COVID, like my children have borne witness to me being, a working chief executive in the kitchen, like in their presence. And whilst I might think that, I might have worried about, does that bring detriment? Actually, it's been incredibly affirming to hear from the kids directly that that's had such a positive influence on them.
Yeah, I feel like that's been another thread in these conversations where we have chief execs who may have a family, may have children, and the impact it's having on them. Seeing the work that they do, there's no doubt, has some sort of imprint on their children or some effect. So that thread of community, and thinking about the roles that you've had, that's definitely a strand through your career, isn't it? Can you talk through the pivotal moments that led you to the NCT?
Yes. I mean, I think I'd have to like time travel to when my brother was so I have two younger brothers, and when my youngest brother was a toddler, I expect, although we didn't really have the language then, that my mother was perhaps wrestling with her mental health. Oh, okay. And she was lonely and she was without kind of community, and I think that she wanted more in terms of like infrastructure. And she tells me a story about how she went to the GP and sort of must have like expressed these concerns, which now would be hopefully more commonplace. And I think he said, well, community play groups and nurseries and things, and she expressed that there wasn't one in the community. And I don't think she got great kind of counsellor guidance. And to her credit, she decided that if it didn't exist, she better get busy getting it started. And she founded a community playgroup in our village, which still thrives today. And I've got this beautiful photo, and it's on it was in an early LinkedIn post that I did when I started at NCT. But having got this job, my mum sent me this photograph from, I think it was like 1979, of like her and the committee that she'd built and all of the children who attended this playgroup. And so it's a really moving picture, and you can imagine like the fashion of the 70s and like all these kids who I still can recognize some of them now as adults. And in that photo for me, I think is a seed of where I've ended up in my life. And so yeah, I think community has been like a very important part, like a prevailing narrative, if you like, in my career. I had a very interesting academic life in Dublin and in Paris. And when I graduated, I came to London to work, and I worked briefly for PricewaterhouseCoopers. It was a wonderful, and quite exquisite experience. But I also found it difficult because I felt a little disconnected from the work. It's an incredible firm, and I have many great friends still there and in the alumni, but I didn't feel like the work was resonating with my values, my personal values. So I didn't stay there for many years, and I left and took what I thought would be a temporary job just to like pay the rent in London as a young person, running a digital inclusion project in a social housing context in the city of Westminster. And that was a turning point in my life. I was working for a private sector company that was, as part of its contract with the local authority, delivering a programme of education and engagement and capacity building initiatives whilst it was doing this major, like decade-long transformation of the social housing estates in North Westminster. And with that company, we developed like such a vibrant programme of sort of social and cultural regeneration that, many years in, they said, wow, what are we going to do with this programme of work when the physical redevelopment comes to an end? So I helped them do a feasibility study into setting up a charity that would be the legacy vehicle for this work that we had built. And, it was a small team of, I think we were probably considered like mavericks, like doing this work with artists and creatives and, community leaders. And then they asked me if I'd like to go and run this charity. And I was very young.
How old were you at this stage?
I think I was 27, 28 when they said, would you like to go and be, and I wouldn't even dare have taken the title of chief executive because I was like, so I think I allowed myself to be the director of this charity. And that was my first foray into charity leadership. I've never looked back, and it's been my life's work and passion.
I think that's what's really interesting about your career. You took on those very senior roles very quickly. Where was your blueprint, or do you feel like you were just predisposed to those types of roles? How did you know how to do it?
Gosh, I've got such a complex answer to that. Like, sometimes I wish I could have another go at it because I think there's nothing that beats time and maturity and learning. I mean, there are some things you do when you're young where you just have the sort of like energy and conviction that you can do it, right? I think when I first started out, I was more concerned about the technical aspects of like managing a small organization. And I was very lucky that in the environment, there were a lot of stakeholders to the work when I was involved in setting up this first charity. And so they all supported me to undertake an executive MBA. And I guess what I think was happening then was my like getting the toolkit, the technical toolkit to be able to run the finance function or the people function or the technology aspects. It took me many more years to really develop what I think are the much more essential skills for leadership. And those come with learning, and they come with making mistakes, and they come with, sort of examining the things that perhaps didn't go so well and thinking, I've got to do this differently. And it's more than a sort of technical competence. It's something much deeper than that. So, I've always felt very, very deeply connected to the missions of the organizations that I've led. I couldn't have done it otherwise, because when I do something, I do it wholeheartedly and unrelentingly. But I definitely think that I've bridged from being in a place of like, this requires technical competence to being much more about this requires compassion and deep listening and working very collaboratively with other people.
Are those the essential skills that you reference?
I think probably initially I thought I needed to be able to read a balance sheet, and I needed to, how to sort of like write a great fundraising proposal, or, I think I thought that leadership, we were in an era, weren't we, of sort of like heroic leadership. Even now when I reflect on my executive MBA, I still think there weren't many female role models or, sort of philosophies of leadership. I think the pandemic changed that in an extraordinary way. So I think I was probably young and impressionable and of a view that, to lead was kind of like to be technically strong at the front of the organization. And of course, I've learned over time that, if you're out front, you might be taking a walk by yourself. So I think over time I've just like really learned to dial up that sense. I think that comes with time and confidence and experience and, and some of the scars from, not always getting it right.
Who gives you the feedback? How do you know you're not getting it right? Is it just, are you having to figure this out yourself? Or is there anyone in your peer group or within the organisation who's going to turn around to one of the most senior people or the chief exec and say, you need to be doing this differently? Or
I have feedback every day. And that's one of the things that I wish someone had sat me down earlier and said, there's going to be feedback, like unrelenting feedback. And guess what? How you orient yourself towards the feedback is really important. And I think initially I felt quite defensive about feedback because I had been academically successful and I was hardworking and I hadn't learned that feedback, and it's such a cliche. People say feedback is a gift. Yeah. I did work with a chairman in one of the organizations that I led where he described how he just went out seeking feedback and was really determined to get it and to do something with it. And I remember feeling quite petrified at the prospect. I was thinking, I get enough feedback as it is. Like, I'm not going to go out and solicit it. And of course, now I feel, I definitely don't feel defensive when I get feedback. I think you can't do a job like this and not be like, there is scrutiny. That's part of the privilege. I'm holding this organisation in trust in small ways and in public ways. And I have to be open to people's feedback and scrutiny. So, I mean, of course, there are formal processes by which you can get feedback, 360 feedback from your peers and your board members, etc. But I would like to think that I have been very proactively, and certainly at NCT, developing a culture which is like very open. We've developed very explicit organisational values under my leadership, and being open and bold and trusted are, some of the values that we've set out. And I hope that over time that's fostering a culture where we can give feedback. Since we established our values, it's incredible how many people write to me and say, in the spirit of being bold, and I know that means take a deep breath, Angela, because here comes some feedback or some observation. And I think, you've got to meet that with humility and with compassion.
So talk about the role that you're in now. Tell us why NCT, why did you take this role on? And what was it like those first 30 days, say, of being the chief exec?
So I very intentionally, in the months before this job opportunity came up, decided that I was going to take, the story I was telling myself was I was going to take a career break, just a couple of months to recharge, because I had done 3 chief executive roles. I'd had 2 children. In one of my jobs, I was involved, with the local community in responding to the fire at Grenfell. I'd had a busy period, a busy decade, and I thought, I'm just going to take a couple of months out. And honestly, within a matter of weeks, the NCT role came, through my inbox, and I just couldn't resist it. I just felt like that's an organisation that's speaking to me. It is bringing together so many things that I'm passionate about. It's got a proud heritage. It was in its founding a community organising movement. It has a feminist, heritage. It's very much, its work is not yet done, like the rights of women. And birthing people in childbirth, in pregnancy, like we have a long, the work is still there. There's good work to be done there. And I felt that having my own children was a truly transformative experience for me. And so all of these things, and I felt like the organisation perhaps needed a new generation of leadership. And at that time, I didn't really know what that meant. I didn't know enough about the work and the complexity and the people and the culture. But I just had a sense from the outside, like this might be an organisation where I could bring my spirit for change. So my first days, there's a lot to learn, always. Having done, as I say, this is my 4th chief executive role. What I've learned is that in the first couple of months, people share things with you and it is precious because they don't know you. And if they step forward to share something, it's because they are passionate about it, or they have concerns about something, or actually they feel very strongly about something, be it, a missed opportunity, an injustice, a campaign. And so people step forward and they share things when you're new. And I have learned that is a moment for really deep listening. And I think some of the things that have ultimately found their way into the strategy that I've, helped facilitate within the organisation, I heard in those early days. But I was also in the job 8 weeks when we were faced with the first lockdown. So it was not the job I thought I was going to do.
Was it as soon as that?
I think I joined like the 3rd week in January, and we were in lockdown by end of March.
I think I've read around some of the things that you did to pivot, but can you tell us a little bit about those things and how easy was it to make those decisions? Was it clear to you what needed to be done, or did you have to see what other people were doing and how they were reacting and then make your decisions?
It was an extraordinary experience. I was really blessed that the organisation, and this speaks to the quality of the people who, work and volunteer and, give time at NCT, that there had been a huge amount of strategic thinking already done, without the pandemic that was just about the organisation's future and how it could ready itself to, you know, to be an organisation that was relevant for the future. So I found that very quickly people brought to the surface like thinking or research or development or analysis. There'd been a lot of strategic analysis done, which was incredibly helpful. But it was also like, I mean, our USP as an organisation is bringing people together at a very sensitive and transformational moment in their life to connect with others. And suddenly the ability to facilitate connection was just like, you know, taken away. And that did involve, you know, a very radical pivot into like, can we do this digitally? And we were not a digital first organisation. We were not a tech, like our work happened in communities, like in community centres and, you know, at the heart of communities. So it was extraordinary to see people just say, we can do this and we can do it at scale and we can do it fast. And we had thousands of expectant parents like booked on classes with us, and we were absolutely determined that those would happen, and more than ever they needed to happen, as well as all our grassroots like community connection group. You can't over control how an organisation responds in that. What you can do is set the tone. And one of the things that I committed to very early with our board is that because we've got a really devolved model. There are like 5,000 of us at NCT, but many people out in the field. The majority of people and women out in the field working in communities. Like we're never going to be able to convene a town hall meeting.
Yeah.
So we said we're going to show up really like maybe every second week or once a month, and we are going to share openly how this is playing out in our organisation. And I wanted to set the tone very early for that sense of transparency and, you know, being open to hearing and taking questions and explaining what inevitably were some difficult choices we had to make. We did have to stop some services. We had to pause some things. We had to say we can't get this safety or the assurance around some of these things. They're going to have to be paused. As I say, the team that I met when I joined NCT, they had done a lot of strategic thinking about these services into the future. And so we were able to say, we're not just flapping about in the dark, like we've actually got some really good insight and analysis here. And we're listening to what families are telling us, like what parents and families were telling us that they most needed.
So you pivoted to doing those classes and sessions online.
Yes.
How were you feeling behind the scenes?
Oh, I mean, I am a person who, I think one of my USPs is I quite like change and I like problem solving. And so I didn't feel overwhelmed by that. If anything, I'm like, okay, then maybe it was fortuitous that I was here because I've got a spirit for change. And I think one of the other things which was advantageous to an extent being new was that I don't think anyone could say I had pet projects or I had favourite services or I had, you were always going to make those choices. I really didn't. I'd been in the field 10 weeks, you know, I had been blessed to get out and meet people and meet services, but not to the extent where I could say, I've always wanted to protect this service. And so I was having to explain with quite a bit of analysis to the organisation, like these are the choices we're making and this is the rationale. And none of these are easy choices and there are some trade-offs.
It sounds like it played to your strengths, which was very lucky for the NCT and all the parents that you support. That's a challenge you've been through. What are the challenges that you have coming up? What challenges does the NCT face today in today's world?
I mean, we have a suite of challenges and I'm also an optimist. So we have a suite of opportunities as well. So I want to say that from the outset. Probably one of the most significant challenges that we face as a society, like as a nation, is that we have a maternity service under stress. You can see the headlines, like we are now getting close to normalising, you know, an environment for women which is unsafe, inequitable, and at times harmful in terms of like pregnancy and birth experiences. And so to be the national charity in that space at a time when the NHS is under so much stress and where safety in maternity experiences is a very real thing, that's a dilemma for our organisation. You know, that's a strategic dilemma. Like, what is our role? What role do we play? How do we get the balance right between educating, supporting, empowering, and being a companion to expectant parents, whilst also calling for change, feeling outrage about the state of maternity, and getting the balance of that right, because I feel a great responsibility to be a source of reassurance for expectant parents. And so how do you strike the balance between calling out with outrage about the system, but also saying we're here for every parent and we'll journey with you and we can support you. So I think that's the first challenge. I think the second is that the lived reality for the majority of expectant and new parents in our country today is tough. It's economically tough. The availability of childcare is tough. There's been a real hollowing out of provision in the community. So, community midwifery, home visiting services, Sure Start centres, family hubs, we really don't have the provision that was there when I first started out in community regeneration. So, families are feeling more isolated, poorer, more time-strapped, economically under pressure to get back to work. And so all of these things mean that we're asking questions about, in our service design and in our service offering, how do we best do that in a way that is additive and reflects where parents are? Parents are more time strapped. They have less money. They are, digitally very comfortable. These are really interesting design challenges. Like, how do you take the thing that we've been excellent at for decades and make sure it's fit for the future? And, we have a strong philosophy at NCT that the only way we can do that is in co-production with the people that we exist to serve and support.
And that must reflect all sectors, all types of people as well, all experiences of parenthood. Because I imagine one of the biggest challenges is around being inclusive. I think about my community. We're based in Brighton. And I think about some of the parents that I come into contact with day to day as a mum. And we have different groups that can be quite isolated from one another, people that don't have English as their first language, for example. My experience of parenthood was that I had 5 miscarriages prior to having my children. And so I felt very uneasy about being with people that had had a typical pregnancy journey. So I didn't go to the NCT groups because I wasn't sure how that would sit with me. I hadn't been able to look at a pregnant woman, let alone talk about my experience in a shared environment. So there are so many considerations, aren't there? Because pregnancy is not a one type of person, one type of experience. In fact, it's so varied. So it must be really difficult to think about all the challenges you're thinking about, but thinking about them through the lens of all the different types of people. And I suppose that's why the co-creation of these services is vital.
I couldn't agree with you more. And if I have a signature, I always say as a chief executive, you're writing you're helping write a chapter of the organization's story. And the one thing that I would like my chapter at NCT to be, the signature to be, is centered on inclusion and really pushing and pressing the organisation for that as as an ambition and as something that we're never complacent about. And I think that in that we have to acknowledge that our heritage as an organisation at times has been in a place which was, white, educated women, not that they didn't have, very demonstrable campaigns for, women's reproductive health, for their human rights and birth. But, we were serving very specific audiences, parent audiences. And I think I'm really encouraged that if you were to ask anyone in our organisation, they would know that the guiding light of our strategy today is to be for every parent, wherever they are, whatever their context, whatever their gender, birth preferences. What we know very well is that it's becoming a more and more complex picture. women are older. They have been on, your experience. I'm very sorry for your personal experience, but it's not atypical for women to have been on a complex journey before they're ready to encounter the types of services that we are able to offer. And so, I want us to be the organisation where you would feel really welcome, where you wouldn't think, oh, that's for a group of people who've had a very sort of typical, happy. Actually, we think deeply as an organisation now about where are we meeting people and what are they likely to have experienced. And, we know that women are older, they have more complex health needs. 1 in 3 births today is to a woman who was not born in the UK. So, we're just deeply aware that we've got a more complex audience, and our currency as an organisation will be about meeting those women and birthing people and parents where they are. And I'm a big believer in co-production. I think that's really important. And so is trust building. There are parent audiences that we are still not, sufficiently known to or collaborating with. And so that's the work that we have to do as an organisation. And in some communities, that's long work, long, deep work. And I've seen, and I'm really proud of the work that we've done in complex, diverse communities, but we have to take a long-term stake there and work, really sensitively, quietly, locally, with partners, with leaders in the community, with women and families, and actually show a lot of humility about how, yes, we've got pedigree and, history and great practices, but we also need to be very receptive to how those can evolve for the needs of communities today. And I can think of some of our projects where we've really, really needed to work hand in glove with the community to get the service design and the impact that we want to make to get that right.
I think the word community is so important because I feel like parenthood is an opportunity to build and integrate communities. That whole experience, it's such a shared experience. But what I have sensed and what I see is that, and I see this now my children are 12 and 10, that if that opportunity is missed, and it's not just the responsibility of the NCT, I mean just generally, if that opportunity is missed, particularly where people haven't lived in the UK for very long or English isn't their first language, then it prevails. So it means that the same groups of people are staying with the same groups of people, and you see it on the playground. And when I go to pick up, there's a real segregation, sadly, between those whose first language is English and those that aren't. And it could have been an opportunity had we all been able to be part of the same experience much earlier on, to support one another, to do something different. And I think that's where the co-production is incredibly complicated, about how you get that right. I spend a lot of time, my mum's from Iraq, and so I do try to bridge the gap a little bit. So I spend time walking to school with a wonderful woman who's got a family, and she came from Syria about 4 or 5 years ago, and we walk together so she can practice her English. And she studies English each and every day at a local college. But her confidence to go on the school WhatsApp group isn't quite there yet, because it's very exposing to join those conversations about, oh, do you know such and such is having a party? Or remember to bring this into school tomorrow, or you've got to bring in a couple of pounds for this cake sale. She can't join that quite yet because it's really quite difficult to speak English in that very informal way. But we walk together, practice English. What I have noticed, as I say, is that segregation plays out. Bringing people like her into that co-production process means that we truly understand, forget all of our assumptions about why people do or don't join groups such as the NCT, but understand really what people's barriers to, for example, joining those services might be, so that we can do something different. I feel very strongly about it. I think parenthood should be an experience where we bond and create community that only benefits those children as they grow up, rather than furthers any lines in the sand that already exist.
I don't disagree with you. I think But I think as well, I'm sort of resisting the sense that we can have this like sense of like a homogenous parenting community. I don't think that that's possible, and I'm not sure that that's what every parent would want. And actually, for some parents, an affinity group, a small group where they feel safe, be that culturally safe, psychologically safe, and that might be on a WhatsApp group and not in their local postcode. Like our research with parents says that there is an abiding desire for human connection. That's bounced back incredibly. We had scenarios at NCT where maybe we'll be a digital-only organisation now into the future. And of course, that's not the case. Like the human desire to connect in person and share experiences is very real, and I think is not going away. But we also see strongly that people want to connect into groups where they can feel safer. And that might be about shared language. For someone like you, it might be about shared experience where you can talk with real truth about your experience. The great opportunity for us at NCT is to be an organisation that can enable all of that. So I deeply regret if people felt that they were having a very isolating experience as a new parent. That is something that I think we organisationally are working hard to, to be the antidote to. But equally, I'm resisting a sense that, one big parenting community would be the answer, because I think for some parents, actually small, safe, trusted circles is what will work for them.
That totally makes sense. It's about forming your community around your experience, but also feeling safe to explore whatever you need to explore. I mean, it's such a vulnerable part of your life. I say this every time I talk about parenthood, but whether you're pregnant, when you first hold that baby, it's very exposing. You feel perhaps more vulnerable perhaps happier than you ever have, or overwhelmed, or whatever it might be, but certainly vulnerable is one of the things that you might feel. So, yeah, that sounds really interesting. I'm absolutely going to be following the work you do in this area. I think it's so important and needed.
And I think that we can feel excited about the fact that with technology, and I'm not like a kind of like digital, I haven't got this like sense of like, a digitally enabled like future at all costs. But I do think that with technology, we can do more to help provide something that feels personalised and responsive. And we've been trialling and testing complementary solutions, as I say, things that we can do online that then work alongside services you can access in person, in your home, in your community. And actually those online spaces, whether they're facilitated on WhatsApp or whether you're joining a national online niche service offering, there is a huge appetite for that sense of because a lot of people don't identify with the stereotype. It's a very unique experience, as you say, and it's a highly vulnerable experience. A lot of the parents we work with, they would just recoil from any language of it being happy, joyful. We have to resist a lot of that sort of marketized, life with a baby stuff, because actually for a lot of people it's extraordinarily challenging. Physically, mentally, relationship-wise.
And all brand new. As a first-time parent and all brand new.
Exactly. And I think meeting parents in a place where you acknowledge that vulnerability and uncertainty and isolation, these are likely to be big components of the uniqueness of people's experience. I think that will mean that we can be an organisation for parents who feel okay, there's a real reality about that. It was one of the things that I observed to the organisation when I joined, which is I don't want us to look like a catalogue. I don't want NCT to show up in the world as a kind of mum and baby catalogue. I want us to show up with all the messiness and all the reality that goes with, as you say, the first 1,000 days with a baby.
How exciting. What a big job you've got to do.
So lovely. It's a great privilege to have this job.
I can imagine. There's so much to what you do, and obviously you're incredibly passionate about it and well placed with all I can really see that kind of link through that strand of community right back to your mum and the photo. It just makes perfect sense. How do you manage day-to-day life? What are your coping strategies?
Well, I'm not great for the definitions, but I'm a single parent / co-parent. I have a very blended family life, which brings great joy and colour and, and lots of logistical coordination. But, I've got life hacks, I'm super organised, but also and this has been a real personal learning for me, is to ask for help.
Who can you ask for help?
I have this small but cherished group of women in my home life who are also working mums, and we just didn't know each other because we were never at the school gate. We were working. And then I think a group of us we bumped into each other. We met almost like serendipity at it must have been a birthday party or something. And then it was like, oh, why don't I know you? Why don't I know you? And then there was this realization of that we're the working mum, we're the working women.
You found your people.
And we decided that we would be the amazing working women, WhatsApp group. And I have had great, community and support from those women. But actually, I still struggled to ask them for help. I didn't know if that was a boundary too far. And then they, I think, just challenged me, you're not leaning on us enough. Why wouldn't you ask us to pick up the kids? And I was I remember saying, because I'm scared that I can't reciprocate. I'm scared that I will ask you and then I won't be able to return the favour. And they were just like, that's not how this works.
Oh, lovely to hear.
So lovely to hear. And of course, actually, when you lean into that, I've been able to be helpful in lots of ways to them. That's maybe not picking up their kids from the swimming club, but I can do other things. So I think asking for help and, recognising you need a cavalry of people at different stages in your children's development.
And how do you identify this stage? What chapter are you in with the children and with family life?
Both my children are now at secondary school, which is such a milestone. My daughter just went in September, and I had told myself that once Ellie went to secondary school, a lot of space is going to open up for me. I won't know what to do with myself. And of course, this is just a folly.
Yes.
Because they need me to do all sorts of other things for them now. But that's the stage I'm at where, the children are increasingly independent. They're so wonderful. They're great dinner company. The conversation is, and they're going through the teenage, experiences and all the sort of joy and challenge that brings.
And thinking about the role of women, I've heard you talk a little bit about this before, but what's your perception of the role of women in 2025?
Well, I expect I've got a biased view of this because I exist both within my organisation and within the wider maternity community in what is there's a lot of impressive female leadership in my life. And it's not always been thus. I've had other stages of my professional life where there was certainly more sort of, as I said, heroic and male leadership. It's a great joy to me to see and to hopefully cultivate the extent of female leadership that I see in my professional life now. And I don't just mean, at one level, I do mean and celebrate incredible chief executives, female chief executives of not-for-profit and, civil society organisations who are some of my greatest inspiration and, the kind of people who I can call if I need to, take a safe sounding about something. But I'm also talking about community leaders and grassroots activists. Just yesterday, one of our branch chairs in one of our NCT branches in the south of England wrote to me passionately about something that she has great conviction about. And for me, that is also, female leadership showing up. And so I think that I'm blessed, but I don't take that for granted, that I am at a stage in my career where I have the comfort and the blessing of having so many and such diversity of female leaders around me. And if you think about the other, if we just look at the national organisations in our space, whether it's Bliss or Sands or Tommy's, or the Twins Trust, or, I could give you a roll call of organisations in this space, the female leadership, community, support, genuine exchange. I'm thinking of the Miscarriage Association. I'm thinking these organisations, they've got... So I feel really blessed to have that. And I have to keep reminding myself that that's quite a special perspective on the world.
Given that we can see all those female leaders, do you think we have a clear definition, or do you have a clear definition of what a woman is today? We can see examples of female leadership, so we're comfortable with that. You're doing the parenting thing. We know that's working out okay. Are you comfortable with the role of yourself as a woman in today's working world and as a parent, or are you conflicted in any way? Do you find it difficult to know who you should be? Should you be the person doing the housework? Should you be the person? Are there any conflicts that come up?
Oh my goodness, I think there are conflicts like on a daily basis. But where's the seed of that conflict, and how much of that is like something that I'm wrestling with versus something that, societally is being sort of forced upon me? Am I comfortable? I am increasingly comfortable, but it's not always been thus. And I think I said early in the interview, sometimes I wish I could rerun parts of my leadership journey again, because I think I would have more courage, and I would, tackle things, which now with maturity and experience, I can say, I'm not sure that was an experience that wasn't without bias, or, had certainly my gender had an influence on. But I think in all things we've got to, strive for balance. I don't know if in the seed of your question is something about female leadership, and I was thinking about this on the way here, but I certainly think that leading with compassion is one of the distinctly female leadership qualities that I've seen. And I think that we saw this in the pandemic, didn't we, at scale, that kind of compassionate leadership to hold people through uncertainty. And guess what? That's not going away. I've been in 2 different events this week where the language is like polycrisis. The sense of uncertainty is, we're just in an ever more uncertain world. And I think when you're faced with uncertainty, what are the things you can hold true to? And I think, leading with compassion and like a human-centeredness is a quality that is important. I really value that, and I try to centre that. I'm not always, not saying I'm a masterclass in it, but that's something that I would strive for. And I think with that comes being compassionate for yourself. I won't be at the school gate, and I will definitely be the woman like running to get to the play, the school play on time. And there are trade-offs. And I think just being compassionate with yourself that says it's okay that I'm not at the cake sale because I'm doing something else, in terms of like contributing to the world. And there are also times when I try to be really transparent at work about, and that's one of the things I love about the culture of NCT is like, if we cannot model flexible working and, being parent-centered, then, that would be a disappointment. So I'm really transparent at work about when I have commitments for the children. I put it in my diary. I make it really explicit. Like, I don't take meetings after this time on a Tuesday because I do the swim school, or, and I try to role model that, and I try to give my team permission to say, you need to say, and we're all going to meet each other as adults and manage our complex lives in a way that means we're giving to work and we're giving to our families and we're giving to ourselves. And I will trust all of you to be adults to work out, the biting point of that for each of you.
Yeah, that role modelling is so important, isn't it? It's people do as you do, not as you say. So if they can see it, they're likely to know they have permission to do it too.
To have permission to do it. That feels really important. And you know what? At risk of sounding biased, I have a largely female leadership team, and I see the extraordinary amount of work and discretionary effort and imagination that they bring to their work. I don't need to worry if they need to do the nursery drop off, or if they're going to the school nativity play. I'm go.
Yeah, you can really feel it, can't you? The change, the shift has been happening since the pandemic. It's evidence now. People can still do a good job. They can bring all their valuable experience and skills. And actually, parenthood gives us additional skills. That's great. We've talked a lot about parenthood and female leadership. But of course, there'll be female leaders who choose not to become parents which is, their own choice too, and still have those skills that we've talked about, and those character traits that can be vital for this role. I had a question, which was, do you believe anyone can become the chief exec of the charity organisation that they work for?
I genuinely do have a conviction that it's not out of reach because of, academic or sort of strategic capability. I think for some people, it may not be it's not for the faint-hearted. And so I think actually being very honest about that is an important part of role modelling. I'm a mentor for a group called Leaders Plus, and I give talks, and I think one of the things that I feel a real responsibility to do when I speak to emerging or aspiring female leaders is to talk about what that means. Like I'm never not on duty. I'm never not the CEO. Of course, I don't want to suggest that doesn't mean I don't have my own life, but just really understanding what accountability means in that role, and that's not something that's written down in a job description or it's in a contract. It's actually about the purpose-led nature of the work. I think that anyone could look to the role of chief executive and think there's a path to that. And I think encouragingly, the path isn't conventional. I think we are making progress, certainly in the charity sector, in saying it's not like you have to have a degree and then a postgraduate degree and 15 years executive level experience. And I think it's such an interesting ecosystem. There are so many interesting charities and community interest companies and social enterprises and movement building. And so it's a place where if you've got leadership capability, you're a natural leader or, campaigner, change maker, you can step forward and lead. I think the charity sector is incredibly good at incubating that. But I do think if you want to lead organisations of a certain scale or a certain profile or with a certain mission, then there is a deep questioning about, is this, is this what I truly want to do?
How do you spot those potential leaders? Is there anything that you've noticed in people and thought, you look like a leader to me because?
I feel like it's quite simple for me to spot. It tends to be human-centred, people who are good at looking after their people and communicating through change. And I guess annexed to that is this point about dealing with uncertainty. I think colleagues who colleagues in my working community who I see. I think resilience is a bit overused, although that's been important to me in my professional life. But the ability to handle a lot of greyness and still lead and be decisive and help people move in a direction, even if that direction is quite, it's not entirely clear. We have a lot of the North Star and we're going in this direction and I'm a big believer in that. But I also think we have to be honest about just how much uncertainty faces us. So I think, human-centred, dealing with uncertainty. And I also think like an entrepreneurial quality because, it's getting tougher and tougher for charities to, create sort of funding and fundraising strategies in the traditional ways. And there's increasingly a spirit of we're going to have to be entrepreneurial. We're going to have to think differently about our assets and about, our resources and how we make those work for us. And so I think the leadership traits that I'm looking for in my emergent or rising stars are people who've also got that kind of entrepreneurial, creative spirit.
Yeah, I can see why. And before I ask you the final closing question, can I ask you, Angela, are you happy?
Am I happy? It's taken me a while to get to a stage where I'm happy. I think largely I'm happy. And it has its locus in really simple things. My children bring me the greatest joy. They really do. And my work is extremely purposeful. And, there is more work than I can do, but it's very rewarding. I would say on a daily basis, I find my work exceedingly rewarding. And partly that's about working in a purpose-led way. And partly it's because it's just intellectually very stimulating. And one of the great privileges of being the chief executive is that you get to do all sorts of things every day, from being like the chief cheerleader to, being a campaigner, and then other times, being a quiet shoulder for someone to cry on if they need a bit of compassionate support behind the scenes. And so I find my work really rewarding and my family life. And I think I'm probably getting to that age in my life as well where, I just care a bit less about what people's, opinions.
It's a nice stage, isn't it? It's a really nice stage.
I'm watching my language, but I'm sort of a bit like, it's not that I care less. I wouldn't want to suggest I don't care, but I think I can just be more confident in the choices that I'm making and not really feel like I have to explain so much. So yes, I'm happy.
Yeah. Oh, that's great to hear. Angela, you've been such an inspiration. I've loved this conversation. Thank you. I think there's so much that our listeners can take from this. But for our closing tradition is we ask for a tip, and we're going to ask you to write it in a book that we've got in a moment as well. But we ask for a tip that you would pass on to anyone that's working at a charity or an organisation like a charity if their ambition is to become the chief exec. What one tip, if you can boil it down to one, what one tip would that be?
I think, and this is definitely more of a do what I say and not what I do. It's a work in progress. I think it's about cultivating really deep listening skills. So I've spent the last year doing a professional certificate in executive coaching. And that was really about, just I need to, sharpen my sword or, make sure I'm not de-skilling. I want to make sure that I'm still investing in learning and developing myself. And I thought mostly what I do now is to coach other people for impact. And the thing that I've learned fundamentally on this course is that the great privilege that it is to listen deeply and hold other people. They talk about providing a container for someone else's thinking. And that has been like a light bulb for me. And I'm really trying to now actively develop this practice where I'm just I'm holding space and I'm giving people my unbridled attention, but I'm not trying to fix the problem for them or jump in with the answer or, here's one I made earlier. I did this before. Actually just contain the space and ask some very simple questions. There's a book I've been reading by Nancy Klein called Time to Think. And she essentially asks 3 questions, one of which is what would you like to think and feel about this? And then you just create the listening space. And so, cultivating deep listening skills is probably the work that I am trying to do and that I would offer as some advice. I'm a bit reluctant around advice, but, as I would offer to other people.
Thank you. That's brilliant. And a book recommendation, which we love here on the Leading Lights podcast. So I really appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it, especially with such a busy life. I know this is going to be so helpful to so many of our listeners.
Oh, it's been my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Leading Lights podcast. Don't forget to subscribe and recommend us to your friends.